Hello, and welcome to yet another completely unprofessional interview, the only tabletop RPG interview show that claims to have a copy of Up the Garden Path, but no, I'm not going to show you. Here today, my special guest is the author of the series of books, Designers and Dragons, and Free Trader Beowulf, A System of Traveler, and also the up-and-coming book, Origins, that delves into the history of the modules and adventures of Dungeons and Dragons from original D&D up to first edition D&D. Shannon Appelcline. Shannon, thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Scott. I appreciate being here. And Origins even talks about Up the Garden Path.
I noticed it's referenced a little bit, and I do have a question regarding that a little bit later on, But yeah, and I don't own it. I wish I did. The rarest thing that I have is which I guess is relatively rare, is the old Warlock book from D&D by I forget the publishing company, Long Beach something other. Anyways, it's a 3-tone cover that, according to Noble Knight, is rare, and thus I'll go with what they say. But anywho, so before we dive into talk about Origins, one of the things we like to do on this show is when we have our guests on, like to know a little bit about them. And more importantly, one of the things we like to ask is, what was it that got you into gaming, RPGs, or anything as such? And I'm sure anytime I ask, it is usually, you expect, it's Dungeons and Dragons, but no story is the same. So how about yourself?
Yeah, well, first up, I totally agree that The Complete Warlock is a real rarity. I've never seen a physical copy of it. It was published by the Warhouse down in Southern California, and yes, it is a total collector's item, really illuminating this era when people were publishing basically variant D&D rules. But to address your question, yes, I am fairly certain, and it's way too long ago, that what got me interested in Dungeons and Dragons was those comic book cartoon ads that they ran that, showed, oh no, green slime is falling on the elf, and here's the dragon, and then they're portaled to another place. And so I'm a lifelong comic book reader, and putting their ads in the comic book format in the comics totally got me into it. So I started asking my dad, hey, I'd really like this for my birthday, hint, hint, hint. And so he got me the Tom Moldvay 1981 BX edition, the one with the famous Errol Otis cover on it that shows the green dragon with the sorceress and the pikemen going at it, and there's the linked expert. And then, because I had no friends who knew anything about D&D yet, he ran my first adventure for me, even though he mostly didn't like games and didn't even entirely understand the system. But we'd collaboratively or serially played some of the early adventure games before then, like Colossal Cave. And so he kind of used that as his model. And so about the only thing I can remember about that first adventure that he ran for me was that there were skeletons in one of the rooms, and he really didn't understand how the combat system worked. And I should note that my dad is an engineer, so he's very, very intelligent and technical. But he didn't understand the combat system even in basic D&D. And so there were rocks in the room, and just like in a computer adventure game, you had to figure out, pick up the rocks, throw them at the skeletons, and they fall apart. So that was my first D&D game and my first role-playing game, and I played it, with friends at school and such after that. Soon they were making gods. I remember one of my friends had the God of the Cats that he made, and I started playing other games. Champions, Stormbringer, and then when I got into high school and I had some military aficionados in my group, Phoenix Command, though I don't think anyone ever understood that, and Twilight 2000 and other things like that.
Oh, that is amazing. I mean, it is such a treat. I mean, these days it's I wouldn't say it's normal, but you hear a lot more because the next generations, myself as a parent and others running games for their kids. My son is very much into role playing games, and I was well enough to guide him through it. The short little story was we were at my daughter's softball game, and he was sitting at a table with one of his friends, and he was very focused on something on it. And I'm like, well, maybe he's just drawing or something. And then after the game was done, he comes over and he's, has a sheet of paper in a hand. He's waving it around. Look at this, look at this. And I'm like, well, what is this? He's like, oh, I made a Dungeons and Dragons character. And I'm like, son, let's take a walk. I have so much to show you, and the rest is history. But back then, yeah, I mean, unless you're from a slightly younger generation, but usually the first generations, where you discovered it with your friends or your brother. Very, very rarely do you hear a father of that period, even not even into it, just going, well, let's figure it out and see how it goes. So that is wonderful. But so you, looking you up, you have a very interesting career that meanders in and out of games. I mean, a lot of people who are probably watching this, know you from Designer and Dragons, the various histories that you've done, and likewise other things. But you've also, as you got older, you had, connections and involvement with, some of the role-playing game companies, did you not? Yeah.
My first thing that I ever sold in the role-playing industry was to TSR. Mm-hmm. I sold them a index of Dragon magazine to supplement one that they'd earlier published. They put an index out in issue 112 or something, and I kept indexing it afterward, and I sold them one that went up to like 155, and they put it on Genie. It was never published, unfortunately, except online. But they sent me a check for like $1,000.
Oh, wow.
Because they paid a per word rate, and $1,000 to someone who was in college at the time in 1989 or 1990, that was mad money. Let alone getting to work for a game company. Mm-hmm. I started running the Ars Magica list when I was in college, the mailing list, because the person who'd previously run it out of UC Davis was graduating, as sometimes happens when you go to college, and. Mm-hmm. That put me in contact with Mark Reinhagen. And so my second work in the industry was doing some revisions to one of the chapters of the Ars Magica rulebook, and then making my own Ars Magica supplement, which was Tribunals of Hermes Rome. And after that, I started publishing something called the Chaosium Digest, which was hey, send me articles about Chaosium. And I explicitly started it just as I was finishing up college with the hope that sometime I could take my work that I'd been doing in college in computer science and instead work in the role-playing industry for Chaosium. Right. And it actually worked. A couple of years later, one of my best friends had gotten a job there, and I said, hey, if they're looking for people because they've just got a big inflow of money from CGs, I'd really like to interview there. And so I did. And that was my most extensive work in the role-playing industry. I worked for Chaosium for about 2.5 years. I mostly did layout of Call of Cthulhu books, a little bit of editorial, but most of that was Lynn Willis at the time, who, of course, was superb. And after that, I ended up at a computer game company when I decided, again, I needed to get some money so that I could actually pay bills, buy groceries, that type of thing. And I did the technical side of running RPGNet for about 20 years, not quite 20.
Yeah. Oh, wow. What video game company, if I may ask? Were you still based in California at the time, or were you somewhere else?
Yeah, no, it was still California. I lived in California for most of my adult life before I moved to Hawaii, where I am now. It was a tiny little company called Scotus Tech. They did online text-based games, so it was always a pretty niche market, but it was role-playing in a way that, even something like Baldur's Gate 3 isn't necessarily, because it's really live interactions with other people, though I should say I'm role-playing in Baldur's Gate 3 right now with a group of my friends.
Oh, that's awesome. Oh, yeah. It was a different time, in the emergence of, I guess you would say, multiplayer engagement in video games at the time. Text based adventures and MUDs and whatnot kind of opened up a lot of things for that. Of course, myself. Don't let the hair dye fool you. I am older, but that some of those things, as video game technology progressed into being more focused on graphics and whatnot, some of those stories and interactions changed. Yada yada yada. Not here for a story of video game history. I got enough of that from Dennis Stetweiler. But yeah, no, that is fantastic. That led to other things. You got to do some of the things that a lot of people dream of, especially these days. There's no shortage of creatives who would just love to be in that aspect. But those particular special days of Chaosium too that you were involved in. So obviously you moved on, but you still kept your ties, with gaming and role playing games, I would imagine. But what started the seed? I mean, it sounds like you've got this particular knack and skill for organizations, detailing, organizing, referencing, creating references for a lot of things that would, I would assume, help you out in your future endeavors. But did you have an interest in the history of RPGs before Designer and Dragons came around? Or was this something that more kind of just, fell in your lap? I mean, was it like a personal project that rolled into this? Or did someone go, hey, Shannon, we know you're good at these things. Would you like to tackle this?
Yeah, so I wouldn't say I had a long time interest in the history of role-playing, but I did have a long time interest in history.
Okay.
I had one of the best U.S. history teachers in the world in high school. He made the learning of history just fun because he created classroom exercises. We did mock trials, but we also did other, games that he had designed. He actually had a little side business that he ran where he created these games and made them available to other teachers as well. That was David Dalpardo, and just a great teacher. He really engaged with his students. He was terrific. And so did I have interest in history before that? I really don't know, because I know it just came out so strongly then. And when I was in college, I seriously considered, do I want to do work in history to go with my work in computer science? And by the by, I should say my work in computer science came about partly because of those MUDs you were talking about, the multi-user dungeons. I got in at 1989. The internet is very nascent. It exists in college campuses and at military bases, and not much beyond that, nothing commercial. And so I started playing these MUDs and other games, and I was like, wow, these are a lot of fun, and it's so exciting being able to communicate with people, all around the world. And so that got me into computer science and made me say, maybe I better do some computer science just so I can stay connected to all of this. Right. But the actual work on Designers and Dragons, it was because of my work with RPGNet. When I was working on RPGNet, I was doing two things. I was driving the content and I was driving the technology. I wasn't as involved in the forums. We had administrators, moderators over there who did a great job. And frankly, I did not want to get involved in the politics of that, because it would have stressed me out.
Sure.
And in fact, stressed me out just, having to backstop that work. But technology and content were the main things I focused on. So content, that meant I was always wrangling reviews and columns and doing my best to see them myself. Hey, what new column can I come up with that will kind of demonstrate what we'd like to see and tell people we have an active ecosystem of columns here. And reviews, the same. And simultaneously technology, how can I rewrite our reviews system, our columns system to be more more modern, more complete, easier to access, easier to use, and what new things should I be adding to the site? And so these kind of dovetailed when I was at Gen Con 2008. Going to Gen Con, it just really enthuses you about the industry. It reminds you of the community. It reminds you of the creativity. And so I got back from that, and I'm like, oh, that was so exciting. What can I do? And I decided I'm going to create an index of role-playing products. Lawrence Schick did a book that I find foundational called Heroic Worlds. And it was a listing with a tiny, tiny bit of commentary on every role-playing product that had been produced from 1974 to 1991, 92, somewhere around there was where it started. A period when you could still have a listing like that of everything. And it was 380 pages or something, not gross. And so I said, what can I do to, have my own listing like that we can put out in the modern day? And so I started writing software to allow me to index role-playing products. And I started filling it out and making sure it worked with my own collection. I'm going through my collection, and I got to Imperium Games. Imperium Games was the publisher who, after GDW went out of business, picked up Traveller. And I'm a big Traveller fan. That's why I wrote This is Free Trader, Beowulf, My System History of Traveller. I have been for a long time. And so I'd had a great collection of Traveller books and of Imperium game books until I started working for Chaosium. And the problem of working in the game industry is you're working for very low wages.
Yes.
I took about a 75% pay cut when I started working for Chaosium, literally true.
I know where this is
And
going.
I didn't have any money for products anymore. And if I'd been going to conventions, I could have, traded and exchanged, but I was the low person on the totem pole. And so if enough other people said, yes, I want to go to that convention, that wasn't me.
Right.
And so I fizzled out. I stopped buying those products, and I never picked them up because by the time I was done working at Chaosium, they'd gone out of business. So I'm putting together this index, and I'm entering my Imperium Games books, and I'm somewhat surprised to say, wow, there were 7 or 8 books or 9 or 10 books after I started, stopped buying them. And then they disappeared. What happened? How did they publish these additional books? Why were they slightly different? Because they were actually being created by people that were more knowledgeable with the Traveller system, with the Traveller universe, I should say, than before. Thanks primarily with some work they did with a British group called Bits, who'd been doing some of their own stuff and then started doing some work from Imperium. So why did they change, and why did they go out of business afterward? And so I started researching that. It wasn't really for the index, because the index, I just put in the books. I found other sources for what they were. But it was because I wanted to know. I was curious. And I got done with that, and I thought, wow, I did a lot of work on this. Maybe I'll write this up, because I've been a writer my whole life, too. And I thought, maybe I can turn this into a column for RPGNet, because, again, one of the things I wanted to do was offer columns and say, hey, this is what we'd like to see. So I wrote it up, and then I did not publish it. And I did not publish it because some of the people I'd been talking to and some of the rumors I had heard, but also some people who'd actually worked there, said, we think there was something funny going on with money at the end. And I was like, oh, I don't really want to publish that without more backup, with more information, just on rumors. But I don't want to publish it without that if it's out there. And so I put it to the side, and I was like, wow, that was a lot of work I did, and now I'm not publishing it. Maybe I should write another one that I can publish. And so the first one I actually published on RPGNet was on Wizards of the Coast. I think I ended up putting it over two different articles because it was so long. We got on Slashdot. I don't know if it was front page, but I think it was at least front gaming page or something. It was front page enough that it started crashing the RPGNet server. And so I spent a whole night bringing the RPGNet server back up because we had so many people reading this Wizards of the Coast article that it kept knocking the server down. Oh. And I thought, wow, there's some interest in this. And so I spent the next year, maybe, writing another history every month or so. And I started getting people asking, when's the book coming out? And some of those people were publishers who said, and we could publish it for you if you don't have someone. And so I said, I eventually took one of the deals that fell through. I took another deal. Mongoose published the book after a lot more work in my evenings and weekends to actually fill it out to book length. And so that's the secret origin of the original Designers and Dragons, which were the company histories.
Right. That is fascinating. I mean, these are the type of things that I'm interested in. Obviously, being drawn to Designer and Dragons, I'm myself and others are the backstory, the behind the scenes, the things that when we were children playing these games, these were just names on covers, articles in magazines. Sometimes you would write a letter and they would respond, but a lot of these stories would just be within the industry themselves, or wouldn't even come to the surface. Every once in a while, you may read something in one of the magazines, but it's just absolutely fascinating for me to dive into that. I, myself and several of my friends that I know who are both collectors. I've got a decent collection of other things that began because of the interest in the origins of things. I mean, growing up in Southern California, probably around the same age. I graduated in 1992. My base foundation was Dungeons and Dragons. The late mid 80s, early 90s. First edition through second, but never really ventured outside of the realm of that too much. Not for want. I was the guy who would, find something I would think interesting, introduce it to my friends, be like, let's just keep playing D&D, and I would go home and cry over my copy of ElfQuest or something, just because I wanted to try something new. But I really didn't get into it until a friend of mine, Andy Markham, sent me a copy of the first Arduin Grimoire. And even though I grew up in Southern California, a lot of those outlier zines and publications I wasn't aware of. But it was kind of a bit of a revelation of like, God, this is different. This is not, polished. It's not well edited, but there was just something very punk rock about it that was just raw, like, knowing well aware of, the punk rock scenes, the music scenes of the time that were done by, friends and fans. It was just something that's like, wow, this is different and this is exciting. And then that led down the path of, looking into things, discovering Designers and Dragons, looking up histories, collecting, rarities, looking up, the best that I can, some of these oddities and whatnot. And that knowledge just kind of grew and grew, and just utterly fascinated by not just, how it was created, but, the drama of certain things behind it that just, just fueled a lot of these things. So, I mean, obviously I'm not writing a book, but I can appreciate the aspect of, finding out these things and going, well, I need to know more, I need to know if this is true or not. So let's dive into, primarily why you're here. I've got some of the questions that I have will kind of flow in and out of, your creation process, kind of like Designer and Dragons, but of course into origins. But so you publish these series of books, and that are well liked by many. But still, there's several people who may not be aware of it, and probably because they're just not interested in that aspect like other people are. They're just happy playing the games, which is perfectly fine. But it obviously it goes on to other things. You said you've been writing Free Trader Beowulf for quite some time. You have a love of Traveler, as many people do. And then obviously I'm going to give a little bit of credit. The primary way that I listened or that I read Designers and Dragons wasn't necessarily reading them, even though I own the books, was, Audible, the pod, off of the Audible app. And Kobe Elliott is just superb. I'm going to give him just a little bit of a shout out. There's something about the way that he narrates those books that can hold my interest for hours upon end, but at the end of the day can lull me to sleep with his dulcet tones. Was he recommended to you? Because I know he's kind of done a couple other things like that, or did he kind of, did you seek him out when you did it? I know we're kind of doing a sidebar away from Origins, but that just popped into my head.
It went through Evil Hat, so it was kind of a little bit removed from me. I am 90% sure that he came in and said, "Hey, can I please do audiobooks of these?" And we said, "Yes, please. That would be so amazing." Because as you say, he is amazing.
Oh yeah, he's fantastic. So in looking at Origins, I downloaded the free preview and did a scan through of it, and of course, well aware of what's been presented by yourself and Evil Hat. The focus changes somewhat. It's more narrow in view, but it's still an appendage of Designer and Dragons. I mean, the name is in the title, but there's no real great. I mean, there's no shortage of the history of TSR. I mean, it's done multiple times in various formats and focus, but was there something particular about these modules, these eras that made you want to zoom in and closely within the TSR catalog?
So Ben Riggs and John Peterson in particular have done amazing books on TSR, which I have used as reference, including Designers and Dragons Origins. Mm-hmm. The Designers and Dragons Origins came about because I was asked to do it. It was 2012, and I was working on the second edition of Designers and Dragons at the time, the one that was the 4-book volume that was produced by Evil Hat. And I got mail from DriveThruRPG, and they said, "We have this exciting new project, but we can't tell you about it. Can you sign an NDA?" So I said, "Yeah, I guess so. I can sign an NDA." And they said, "Well, you know that Wizards of the Coast pulled all D&D products off the electronic market 5 years ago because they were afraid of piracy. We've got them to go back in. And so we're going to set up a new site called D&D Classics. We're going to rescan everything that we can possibly rescan to have clean new versions whenever we can get clean new versions. And we'd like a little history with each." And they liked my work that they'd seen at that point on the first edition of Designers and Dragons from Mongoose, and probably I'd done some writing for the alumni column for Wizards of the Coast at that time. And I said, "Yes, but." And the but was, I want to own this, because that's been my primary requirement in any history writing that I've done, except for the ones that I did for Wizards of the Coast, that I retain it, which isn't standard for the industry, which a lot of people may not know. But most of the creative work that's done by designers, illustrators, etc. in the industry, they don't own, they don't get royalties for, none of that. So we had to go back and forth on that a little bit, not because they were adverse to it, but because they had some very valid concerns about their continued use. And because they were trying to finish up this big deal and get all these books, available for PDFs, well, I was annoying them with, and I want to keep rights. But they very generously agreed to it. And they said, "Okay, and we need to have the first 30 in the next month." So that was how the project started. And their requirements were not large. They were happy if they had a few hundred words. I think we set maybe 250 or something words as a minimum. And a lot of the first 30 or so were probably in that range or a little bit longer because, I was doing a whole bunch at once. But they had a plan where they were going to put out another 4 to 6 products every week until they had everything out, or at least everything they could access. And so I ended up working with them on that project for about 5 years. Through 2017, it was the last invoice I could find on them. And I would never have worked that long for them because it was grueling work that I was spending every single weekend on for 5 years on end if I hadn't retained the rights to it. But I was like, yeah, I'm putting this out there. It's probably great publicity for my other Designers and Dragons work. I always got a lot of comments on them, more than I did on the original Designers and Dragons books. Yeah. But I knew I also had potential content for books. And so that was the original inception of Product Histories, just that they had products and they wanted histories for them. And I should say that the history's gotten much longer than that original 250 words, and they've gone longer again when I started revising them for books. And so what's in the book is 4 books, about 320 products over those, 368 times 4 pages. But it was because they asked for it. And it's a very different type of history than what Ben or John have done. You know, they've done beautiful, great business histories. John in particular has really traced a lot of the tropes, mechanics, patterns, etc. like that, while Ben is focused more on, you know, the business stuff that was going on. But these instead, they look at individual products and they say, as much as can be dug up, what is the history of this product? A lot of them, especially from the time period covered by these 4 books, there's a lot of history. But particularly as later ones, you know, when it was the 100th the adventure module put out instead of the 3rd, there's a little less interesting to say about how it was produced. Particular in the later 80s, it's amazing how much of the adventure modules were being produced at that point based on write something for this cover or write something for this name that we've already announced.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. It's really amazing how much that changed in just a couple of years. Because, you know, I go back and I look in 1983, 1984, whenever Quagmire came out, it was a basic D&D adventure that we know a lot about because a whole article's been written on its conception. They were still pitching modules at the time. You know, this is my, you know, couple of page overview of what I'd like this module to be. And just 2, 3, 4 years after that, in the late 80s, it was like, okay, we came up with this name, Test of the Warlords. I'm pretty sure that was one that was based on the name. Go and make something on that. But the scope is very different because we look at the history of an individual adventure, module, rulebook, whatever. And I always tried to include, here's the big things happening at the company. Sometimes here's the big things happening at Gen Con, other things like that within the RPGA, that type of thing. But also, how did this came to be produced? And especially as I expanded it, there's also a lot on each product on, you know, what did it do to the setting? How did it change the setting? What did it introduce to the setting? What NPCs did it introduce that have become famous since? What's the background of those NPCs if they grew out of games or such, like a lot of the early Greyhawk ones do? You know, what are the monsters that appeared for the first time? What do we know about their derivation? So that kind of all goes into each product history too. And it's a very different, very tight focus, but, you know, not necessarily looking at the business, though that's scattered in there.
Right. Amazing. So, Designer and Dragons, I would imagine, at least just from reading it, these may be assumptions. I could be wrong, but I would imagine not only just, you know, historical research, but relied on, you know, interviews with various people, reaching out to speak with them, probably even looking into, you know, rare articles, fanzines, you know, trade publications and whatnot. But, you know, this one being what it is, it's centrally focused on the histories of these individual modules. But did you have to, you know, as far as your research process and your sources, was it similar, or were there things that you had to do differently or change in finding this information, other than just going, you know, here's a PDF, write, you know, do research and write about it?
Yeah, it was similar, both for Designers and Dragons and for Origins. I start with, as much as I can, interviews mostly, but also sometimes things that people wrote about their own process that appeared at the time. Because it is amazing how horrible memory is. It is amazing when you have someone who has done interviews over decades, how things change over time. You know, not in any purposeful way, but just, you know, I've read some studies that say that we kind of rewrite our memory of events every time we recall the event. And so the more we recall it, the more we talk about it, the more it begins to differentiate from what originally was. And that's very true. So first thing is always, how much can I find from, whatever year I'm writing about? Right. And after that, I look at things afterward, and I usually try and write a draft off of that. And when I write the draft, and this has been true for both the product histories and the earlier company histories, but more for the company histories, I'll then try and seek out the people who were involved and say, hey, can you look at this and can you tell me what I got wrong? Or can you tell me what I missed? And with the product histories more so, when I did that, I'd often ask, and can you tell me anything about how this was produced? Because there was actually nothing in the literature and all I could do was look at the product. More true for the later ones. So, but very similar process. Primary sources, secondary sources, draft, then talk with the people and see what else they would like. And sometimes I would also have explicit questions like, why did this happen? Because I really want the why as much as I can. That's very important for me, not just to say the how, the what, but the why. Because I think that's what's probably most interesting to a lot of us. Where did this idea come from? Why did they produce this? Why did they go in this new direction?
Yeah. Why did you make a magic revealing eye module? Things such as that. So the research aspect. You had mentioned that Wizards of the Coast reached out to you and said, Drive Through, but Wizards of the Coast is rescanning, republishing, this older content to be made available for purchase. But which provided you with, I would imagine, with the necessary means to reference these modules. But what about the rarer ones? I mean, Up the Garden Path, Palace of the Silver Princess, and I don't know if you're including these in here, but things if you needed to, hypothetically speaking, like the tourney packets, which some may consider to be part of the history and whatnot. How do you go about getting this information? I mean, do you have your own collection? Do you reach out to other collectors that can provide you this information? And there's other means that people can get this information that, a lot of these older modules aren't readily available. They're behind ridiculous paywalls. And sometimes people who are interested in seeking out the historical aspect of the RPG kind of get themselves in a particular moral quandary of going to particular places to find these things. But did you have any issues with some of these modules? Was there ones that was just really difficult to get the information that you needed?
Yeah. So Drive Through RPG provided me with the PDF of everything I wrote about. And so that made it very easy because, of course, they were about to publish it. I was doing all of these just in time. They said, here's the schedule for the next month. And at least in the week before I needed to publish, I would have the module. And so that was 80 to 90%. We actually had one other writer working at the time who was Kevin Kolp, and we split the baby down the middle. I did OD&D, AD&D first edition, basic D&D. He did third edition, and we split it second edition based on various settings. And so I did probably Greyhawk and Forgotten Realms, which made sense since they dated back to first edition. He did Birthright, probably Ravenloft. But I also made sure I got copies of the modules that he was looking at in case I needed them for the future, because I was already thinking about it. One of the really hard ones to find that you mentioned, the original copy of Palace of the Silver Princess, the Orange Edition. Wizards of the Coast made that available on their website at one point. And so not only was that easy to access, but if you go back in archive.org and can find the particular place where they used to store all of their PDFs that they were making freely available, it's still there. There are other very hard to find ones. Up the Garden Path is one. The Jade Hair is another. That was a basic D&D promo module that they did. I think maybe they gave it out through the Dungeon Hobby Shop, if I remember. It's in the product history, of course. And those ones I was able to find on the internet via various means. And
Right.
at least for me, it didn't feel like a moral quandary because I know that the various copyrights allow fair use for research purposes. And so I'm like, yeah, that's not valid. It's not up. It shouldn't be up there. But at least I don't feel bad about using it for the purpose of research.
Yeah. No, I mean, obviously it's been a question of debate for some time, and there's two sides of that particular coin. But for those who want to find these rarities, and we're not talking about things that that were even published in PDF form at the time. This is somebody who cut apart their their Dragon Lord zine from the UK and scanned it umpteen years ago, and it's reached its way onto somewhere through trading and whatnot. It can be difficult. I mean, like as a collector myself, there's several items that I would love to have, but my children need to eat and go to college, and I've got a mortgage to pay, and kidneys aren't going at a high rate right now, but. So seeking out these things that you're interested in, it's I definitely can see both sides. I do kind of wish that in a perfect world that there was a archival repository of all of these wonderful things that you could go to and check out, or pay a small fee to support it, to look these things up for those who are genuinely interested in learning about these various obscure games and whatnot. But anyways, I digress. So the in regards to the rarity, one of the weird things that I've seen, and I don't know if this is something that you may have tackled in your book, is rarity doesn't always equal influence. And do you, in regards to these rare modules, do you feel that this mythology around these things overshadows how these actually shaped how people play? Did people actually play these things, or were these modules just become rare and interesting because of the drama behind them? I mean, Up the Garden Path being one of the ones, the story behind it makes them extremely rare. But the some of my UK friends who have a copy or who have read it, says it's not very good, and whatnot. So I mean, is these particular modules, it's like you're getting them because of the story, not because of the content. And in delving into these modules as you're doing your research, have you found out particular things as you're looking at these and kind of coming to the realization, even maybe later in life, that wow, this was not how I remembered it. This wasn't that good. So is any of these standout situations occur during this research, or am I just assuming?
Oh, I think you're very right in that the modules that are rare probably had almost no influence. I think I probably listed I know I have a list of Holy Grails in one of my product histories, and I would guess they're probably Palace of the Silver Princess, the Jade Hair, and Up the Garden Path. I think that's what I listed as the three top rarities.
Right.
And none of those had any influence, unless you count what Palace of the Silver Princess had in influence on Discord and Chaos at TSR, and being one of the blows that kind of led to a real exodus of designer talent at the time. I don't think anyone left explicitly because of that. It was more over battles with management. But I mean, none of them. I mean, the Jade Hair, it was put out, like I said, I think through the Dungeon Hobby Shop. It was a little 8 or 16 page adventure, and set, not even in the known world. So it wasn't in the interesting setting that they were developing for basic D&D at the time. And I couldn't even tell you what the what the plot of it was. I don't remember. It was probably a MacGuffin hunt for a jade hair. That would be my guess. And I know
Sure.
I talk about it a little bit in the actual product history. Up the Garden Path, super intriguing story behind it. The UK was recovering industrial sites at the time, and they were turning them into parks. And there were, events for these. And one of these events, they decided to make a TSR UK adventure for when TSR UK was just on the verge of disappearing, going out of business, at least losing all of its creative staff. And the adventure is set in the park that was reclaimed, except it's, got some fantasy story about a demi plane and such, but the map is the map of the garden area. And so you can just tell from that it's probably not going to be the best adventure in the world. Palace of the Silver Prince is the last of those three. It was a module by a first-time adventure writer, kind of using ideas that TSR had already stopped using in Search of the Unknown. So, again, it had some interesting stuff. It had some interesting kind of romantic and/or BDSM design, which you wouldn't have found anywhere else in TSR's adventures at the time, but also wasn't influential.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so interesting. It's these collector's items, right? These rarities. Very rarely are they the ones that you go, hey, I got an idea. Let's play this. They're the bright and shiny. They're the trophies to say this is what I've got, and that's kind of one of the reasons why if I'm getting into something older and I'm looking for something relatively rare, I've heard word of mouth or read something about, I'll look at the price and just go, oh my God, this is this. I can't justify myself just because I'm interested in knowing about it because I know I'll never use it. Now, that's what a lot of people say collectors are, is, they're quote unquote hoarders, but, they're as the material that, for the most part, most of the material that I've either read or will use one way or another or have completely played. But in other realms, like I never really see myself pulling down like Alma Mater and going, I'm going to borrow from this book to run something else. That'll just sit there and my son will discover it after I die. So, excuse me. So you focus a lot, in the beginning. You had said yourself that your primary focus was on OD&D, and looking at the preview, which is beautiful, by the way. The layout, the aspects of the art, the covers and whatnot that were presented in the short preview. I believe in the preview, I could be wrong, that you highlighted in this book that Greyhawk itself transformed OD&D into something more resembling modern D&D. So do you consider it like the real foundation point of the game as you presented in there? The primary reason why I ask is I'm not sure if you're aware of it, but there's a big movement in a certain section of the hobby, parts of the OSR that they're venturing back. There's old school players who are returning to OD&D. There's even younger players that are discovering OD&D, and there's a large movement of various people who are restructuring D&D. They're cloning or OD&D. They're restructuring OD&D. They're trying to clean it up. They're re-presenting it again. But they're not including the various aspects of Greyhawk. So is Greyhawk truly the real foundation point in D&D in this particular history in this book as it's focused upon?
Yeah. First, the book isn't mostly OD&D. OD&D is 2 chapters in the book, and there's about 45 overall. So it's a real mix. Almost 2 full books are on AD&D first edition. That's probably the most. There's the 2 chapters at the start on OD&D, and there's about a book and a half on basic D&D before it became Mistar and AD&D second edition.
Yes.
But is Greyhawk the basis of OD&D when it really became? I'd say no.
Okay.
As you say, there's a lot of people who are interested in just OD&D. I mean, we've seen that as far back as the white box edition of Swords and
Right.
Wizardry. People that, just want to go with that original, I don't even have thieves in my game. Greyhawk fundamentally changed the game in two ways.
Yeah.
It introduced a combat system, and it introduced the thief. And so those are both very fundamental changes, but there was a D&D game before them, and there's a D&D game after them, and they're just different D&D games. And there are any number of milestones like that you could find in the history of D&D where you say, wow, it was a different game before and after. I think the publication of Dragons of Despair, which was the first of the Dragonlance books, that was maybe an even bigger pivotal moment, because it said, before this, Dungeons and Dragons was about swords and sorcery. And after this, Dungeons and Dragons was about heroic fantasy. Before this, Dungeons and Dragons was about sandboxed adventures. And after this, it was about plotted narrative, maybe even railroaded adventures. And so there was another real milestone change. Another year comes on, and Unearthed Arcana comes out. And Unearthed Arcana, 1985, I was there when it came out, but a lot of people who weren't may not realize that, 5 years, AD&D's Dungeon Master Guide came out in 1979, and that kind of completed the AD&D game. Unearthed Arcana came out in 1985. 6 years later, that was the first time that anyone had really seen new rules for the game. The idea that the game could be expanded not just with unofficial rules in Dragon Magazine, but with an actual new tome. And so another milestone. 2 years on, you have Forgotten Realms. And suddenly TSR produced 8 or 9 setting books that year. Some for the Forgotten Realms, some for the Gazetteers of the Known World. And so I think every time you could say there was a different D&D game before, there was a different D&D game after. And everyone in the old school decides which particular chunk of AD&D or OD&D or other system, which one defines my play and is what I'm interested in enjoying.
Right. Oh, yeah. I mean, my son will be an old man saying that 5th edition was, the last game that you should ever play when it comes to D&D. This is the definitive edition, while his son is going, Dad, 10th edition is the way to go. But so TSR's visual identity, it's been done. It's been highlighted in many different wonderful books, some better than the others. But, and they've become, as iconic as the modules themselves. And quite, a lot of people might say that some of them may not, kind of carry the weight of some of the modules to garner attention to them. So in the history of these modules, as you're writing about it, did you feel that the artwork on the covers and inside was an important thing to focus upon? Did you touch upon this in any way, or was it primarily just the internal components of these games as you went through and compiled them?
Yeah, so Arts and Arcana is right over my shoulder, which is definitely the definitive book, especially on the early work. Yes, I looked at primarily the covers, because I knew we were going to be able to present the covers and that they would be sitting there. And if I talked about them, people could see them. And so when I wrote the original Prague Histories, I talked about the covers. And literally the last revisionary pass that I did is I went back through all 4 books and I said, let me look at every cover, because I'd collected all the covers by that time. I didn't necessarily have them in one easily accessible format before. And let me look at every one and see, is there something that I should talk about there? And the graphical evolution of TSR is very intriguing, and I probably could have talked about it more, but for every single product I had to figure out, what can I write about in 5 or 10 pages, or 2 or 3 for some of the shorter ones, as opposed to 30 or 40, because I could have just kept going probably on most any product. But you look, and TSR started producing these little, practically pamphlets, booklets, digest-sized books, the earliest ones with, 1 or 2 colors on them. They started doing full-color modules, and they're printed in 2 colors. And, they kind of disguise it, the fact partially by the fact that they had colored backgrounds too. And then you see, around 1980, suddenly they have full color covers, but the design is still pretty, I wouldn't quite say amateurish, but pragmatic. That's probably a great word. And then 1982, TSR got a finishing department, and the finishing department came in and they said, oh no, we can make this look much nicer. Maybe for the basic line, we have these color bars at the top that match whether they're basic, expert, etc. We could put gradients in because, we're getting really fancy with, these 1983 computers. And, again, you see a big evolution. And a couple years later, suddenly they're saying, hey, maybe we should be using full page color artwork more on the covers, because before they'd been having about half page, except for the boxes and some of the square bound books early on. So just from 1974 to 1988, there's this constant evolution, particularly in the early years, that shows how much TSR was growing in particular. So yeah, I've tried to cover some of that. Every single product history starts off with I think artwork and design is what I call it. And so I talk about graphic design elements, covers, interior art very occasionally. Titles, mainly where I complain about the lack of apostrophes on early book titles, other stuff like that. And then I have a history section where I get as much as I can about the history and what we know about it. Then there's about expanding the rules in this, and then there's tropes, common tropes that you see: save the princess, captured, other things like that. And then I talk about other things like monsters, NPCs, etc. So it's all there. Not necessarily everyone's on every entry, but because I had this organized set of topics, I at least could think about them for everyone. And like I said, the covers, I did a final pass through and said, is there anything on the covers I didn't think about?
Okay. A lot of work. I mean, it's definitely involved. 5 years, you said, it took you to compile all this information. Longer?
Yes. It's overall been about a 15-year project. So I started writing product histories in 2013, and I continued that through till 2017. I had somewhere under 1 million words at that point, but getting close to it. And then I put it on the back burner for a couple of years because we were getting ready to move to Hawaii. And then once we got here, I started dedicating half of my time to writing, and I couldn't just decide on one project because I had all of these projects I'd been wanting to do and didn't have time for. And so one of the major projects I started working on was converting those articles into books, which meant expand them. I usually didn't have to fully rewrite them, but some of them I did. And definitely I found, hey, when I regularize them, I didn't talk about this at all, and I should have on this. And so there was more expansion. These 4 books, which cover OD&D, AD&D First Edition, Basic D&D, and Mystara in Second Edition, they are 110,000 words each, I think. I think that's what they were when I turned them over. So 440,000 words. I'll tell you, I didn't send them everything. And that's because I have 6 more books laid out for a second edition, of which got 1 done and 1 almost done. And I'm planning to keep them at the same rate I've been doing the whole time, which is a book a year. So if people are interested, we'll have second edition books in about 2030.
2030. Okay. I mean, I'll be honest, as far as your output is concerned, we, at the time, there were, Designer and Dragons is that all, are you going to continue on with the years as they progress? But the day that, it dropped, myself, I went to Audible. It's like, there's a new book. So that's got to be, I don't know, that's got to be like a good feeling that, people are waiting on bated breath because they've enjoyed, what you've written and what you've done. So how you envision origins, I mean, and this also falls into Designer and Dragons. So, do you feel, or how would you like people to look at your books? I mean, are these meant to be a straight read through? or more as a reference type book, or as a particular history book or something, or is it all of the above? Can people enjoy it in many ways, but as far as yourself, when you sit down to write these books, the way you write them, the way you present them, myself will write all the way through, but of course there will be an occasion where it's like, I'll get back to Dreampod 9. I'm not interested in that part. I'm going to move on to something else. But as for yourself, the legacy of these books, how would you like for them to be looked upon and potentially remembered?
Yeah. So I think I would answer all of the above, even though that's a kind of easy answer.
Sure.
But I'd go further than that and say that I have done my best to design the books to be read in one of two ways, either chaotically, sporadically, or through. So each individual product history, this is one kind of weird thing that I do in my writing process. I tend to write books that I can write in little nuggets, whether it's one company, one product. I've also been long working on a book about Michael Moorcock's works, in which I, write about one book at a time. And I try my very best not to write them in order. So, I even if I had not had the demands of Drive-Thru RPG, I need to write about whatever they happen to be publishing this week, I would have wanted to write it back and forth. With the company histories, I've tried not to stay in one decade for too long. I've tried to jump to different decades. With the Michael Moorcock books, I might read a few Elric books, jump to a few Hawkmoon books, jump to Between the Wars, etc. And so that, I think, helps them stand alone, each of these particular little nuggets that I write, whether it be about a product, a book, a company, whatever. And it also creates a lot of cross-pollination, I think, and that I see connections that I would not have seen if I had just gone the obvious path through. So that's the one. And since Designers and Dragons, I have tried to support that reading method by every single entry. And this includes every single one of those 300 plus product histories and origins has a what to read next. And I just kind of list the interconnected things. So for Origins, one of my dreams for how someone reads it is that someone's going to say, wow, we just ran Tomb of Horrors. Wow, I just read, the Dragonlance trilogy. I want to read about those products and see, what we know about the history and kind of where it falls into the history of the product. And so I envision people picking those up and reading through the things that interest them and either continuing through, because each of the chapters is organized by a topic. It's not quite chronological through the book. It's, each chapter, hey, here's a Dragonlance chapter. The Dragonlance chapter was followed, I think, by some of the setting neutral stuff that was published at the time. And then we got to TSR UK. Right. So they might read through the chapters, or they might see this book and go through and say, hey, he mentions here, this is where this designer appeared for the first time. I'm going to bounce back there so I can read the history of how the designer came into the field, because every single designer who wrote anything in these books has a little mini history, maybe as short as one paragraph, maybe as long as 2 or 3, that as much as we know, it's always as much as we know, gets into how did they get into the field, how did they get into role playing, what was their path. So that's the one path, the, chaotic bounce around, like my Roomba that doesn't do maps and it just goes in a random direction whenever it hits a wall. And the other one is definitely straight through. My last edit before I gave it to Evil Hat for the first time, which I think was before I did like the covers and stuff, was I edited all 4 books front to back. And part of what I did was I said, I talk about this particular topic, and actually the second place it appears chronologically, I need to move that back to the first so that someone else reading through has the experience of finding out about it in its full detail the first time it appears and then it being referenced more. And I had to do a lot of that when I converted these from product histories to books too, because the product histories, they were each totally standalone. And so I even repeated things a lot. And whereas the book, I want to be a clean chronology that if people read through, they can see how things evolved. They can see the tropes that appeared. And I should put a big asterisk on that, in that there are 2 big through lines in the books, and that books 1 and 2 step all the way through OD&D to the end of AD&D first edition, and that was 1974 to 1988. And then books 3 and 4 step all the way from J. Eric Holmes's edition of Basic D&D through all the Basic D&D lines, through the Mystara lines that followed, and through the last couple of books that they put out online because they didn't want to publish them. And that's 77 to, I think, 96. And so you do have to look back and forth a little bit, but the Basic D&D line was so segregated. Most of the people in design didn't like it. It was seen as the lesser line. The prestigious line was working on AD&D. And so particularly, I think when Bruce Hurd was in charge of it, they got to do all these innovative things. And so they're not necessarily reflecting what was going on in AD&D. They're both really interesting stories, but they're told in parallel so that they didn't get muddled together.
Interesting. I'm curious then, because with the advent of the Gazetteer line for Basic, that obviously went through several editions and whatnot. But if what you said is this just more there was more focus on the more prestigious aspect of AD&D, would that have allowed then for them to go through the creative aspect with less focus and do what they want to do as they're creating the Gazetteer, because they're well loved by many people, and then there's several of them are superb on their own. So you hear about that in a lot of different creative industries. Like there's this wonderful thing that came from the shadows because everything was focused on the big AAA thing. Similar way is that how Gazetteer came about and how it was written and presented.
Yeah, I definitely get the impression that's the case. And you just see a huge change when Bruce Hurd came on, because Frank Mintzer was doing it beforehand. He was the one that did the whole BECMI line, from Basic to Immortals. And then he went off and he worked for New Infinities, which was Gary Gygax's new company after he lost control of TSR. And so there's this big change. And Bruce Hurd, the most interesting thing is that he was the acquisitions coordinator for TSR. He was the one that was, working with freelancers. They had their own design department, but especially as you get into the later 80s, they're doing more products with freelancers. And the reason he got in charge of Basic D&D was because it was being done almost entirely by freelancers. And so he kind of became the de facto line editor as a result of that. And yeah, he got to... I'm sure he still had to go to the suits. He had to make his presentations. He had to argue for why this would actually make and not lose money. But he got to do lots more there. He totally redesigned and renovated the line. I've been working on a little visual timeline that shows all of the Basic D&D products. And you see all of these adventures up to 1985. And then there's this gap, no adventures for a whole year for the Basic D&D line. And then suddenly there's the Gazetteers in 1987 and a Return of Adventures too. And I've never seen that abrupt a change at TSR or Wizards of the Coast, except when the 4th edition line suddenly got pulled down. And that was pretty much one person getting to put his vision on the line.
Fantastic. And again, very well loved, a lot of good stuff in there. That's still being used today. You may have seen him kind of creep his head around the corner. My son's 18, but he references a lot of the old materials to draw from for Game and his friends. And it's just the discovery, to be, 16, 17, 18 again, and just reading these for the first time and going, wow, this is fantastic. So we'll wrap up here shortly. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but just a couple questions regarding, the completion of these books. One, was there one or two that you absolutely just could not wait to go and discover the history behind that you were, looking forward to sitting down and spending time with this? And two, out of all the ones that you've done, do you have a favorite one personally that you enjoy the most, whether it be just reading it, discovering the history or playing it, or all of the above?
I think the one that I looked forward to the most was Palace of the Silver Princess, because it was a product that was recalled and destroyed as much as they were able to. Right. And so you certainly see discussions all over on why did this happen. And just like when I was writing my first history of Imperium games, I was really thrilled to figure out why did this happen. And there's not a definitive answer, but at least I could get answers from several people, including some personal talks with some people that were working at TSR at the time, of what they think happened and what they heard. And so that was one that definitely I was thrilled to find out about. My favorites. I love the original deities and demigods. I got my first basic set, I think, in 1982. So Deities and Demigods, it was already out. It was one of the ones I picked up. I don't know how, but I do have a copy of the original with the Melnibonian mythos, which was one of the most evocative things in there, and one of the reasons I love it. So I'm very happy I got that edition. I guess it must have been in print, I think through the third printing is what the AKM says for which ones had that in it. So that was, I was probably into 81 or something. It must have been a very early book I picked up. But I just remember looking at that so much, and the Norse myths and, like I said, the Melniboni myths and the Cthulhu myths, almost around a decade before I started reading Lovecraft. There's an image of Cthulhu, which just shows him all blobularly and stuff in there, which I think maybe it was by Errol Otis.
Yes.
All of that stuff was always just, fodder for the imagination, whether it got used in games or not. And it didn't in any games I ever ran, at least. Maybe not I played in. I remember a very Munchkin-y game I was playing in elementary school or junior high, one or the other. So that's certainly one that still draws me. And the other is the one I mentioned earlier, which is Unearthed Arcana. The introduction of all of these new classes, the Barbarian, the Cavalier, the Thief Acrobat. Well, maybe no one ever used the Thief Acrobat. It was very complex with moving in and out of the classes, I recall. I remember one of my best friends that I was gaming with at the time, he suddenly wanted to play Drow, whatever, all of the time. And so it was a very influential book. And I also really loved Temple of Elemental Evil. It was, I felt, one of the few, it seemed to me at the time to be one of the few books that ever really revealed Gary Gygax's Greyhawk. And it was drawn directly from his campaign, but was drawn from the later part of the campaign. When he ran it, he was experimenting with randomization of dungeons. And so, how much of it's really in there. But, I mean, it had the Battle of Emery Fields. And so there was actual setting, background material, which was much more scarce than a lot of the other things. Like, the Giants modules, the first one, it begins with something like, the Giants are attacking the lands of man. There's no actual country mentioned in that original one. And so I've been intrigued by Greyhawk, most of my D&D career, in large part because it was so withheld from us, because there was so little information. And so actually seeing so much background material in that one, and actually two detailed cities, Hamlet and Nulb, that was all very exciting. I'd never seen the original Village of Hamlet before it. And I've run it twice. My copy of it is fairly literally falling apart. The back cover is just hanging on by a string because I've run it twice. I ran it once in the 80s in high school, and I ran it once in the odd for my group that had grown out of college. And so hard not to love something that's 128 pages and you've run all the way through twice. And the first time I ever ran it in the 80s, my group freed Zug Demoy, and then they ran away. And so then we had the whole campaign of, she's raising armies. I used battle system for big battles, that type of things. The second time I ran it in the odd odds, they got down to the open up the doors. They open up the big scary doors. This goddess comes out. They're all, oh gosh. And the druid throws a hold plant spell at Zugdemoy. And she fails her saving throw by rolling a 1 or a 2. And I'm like, I guess that works. Okay. Campaign over.
Oh, fantastic. That is the foundational aspect of the games that we play. The many people may, have certain things to say about the Temple of Elemental Evil, but if you had taken some people's advice and just said, we'll move on to something else, you wouldn't have these fine memories of these wonderful games and the outcomes and whatnot. So it's that is superb. I love hearing those particular stories. That I don't know. I'm not tossing an idea, but that would be kind of an interesting read to have. Maybe certain people in the industry recall events like this, from their favorite game, because those just the joy in hearing some of these things is fantastic, and it sticks. I may forget my son's birthday by a day every year, but the game I ran in 1992 is still stuck right in there. It refuses to leave. So that is fantastic. So Origins comes out and drops in about 11 days, I think. The timer, did I have it up? I did have it up. Let's see. Launching soon. We have 11 days, 17 hours, 10 minutes, and 59 seconds until it drops. So, Shannon, I really appreciate you coming here. This has been superb. I've enjoyed this talk. I could easily sit here, for another, hour, 2, 5, 9, whatever you want. It's, and occasionally hear the the cry of the Hawaiian rooster in the background. That was a joy to hear. But I'm sure you're very busy. You're anticipating the books coming out. I know you've got other people to speak with. Quick question: Has Seth Skorkowski reached out to you to do an interview with you yet, or have you done an interview with him?
I don't think so.
Okay, because I know he was one of the ones that answered you, and him and John do their Modern Mythos podcast, so he may ask you on. But I get to tell him I got you first. I've been got to know Seth over. Well, first I should ask. You know who Seth Skorkowski is, right?
Vaguely.
Vaguely, that's fine. Vaguely's better. Vaguely is better. He's a YouTuber, interviewer guy. But I brought up to when I interviewed Dennis Detweiler, and of course, it's the bubble. The big fish in a small pond of how certain people are. Some names mean something to someone, they mean nothing to other. But I had gotten to a conversation with Dennis, and Dennis said, as I mentioned his name, I'm running Dennis's Impossible Landscapes campaign for him, and Scott Dorwood is in there. I would imagine you probably know Scott Dorwood or by name or whatever. And anyways, and so I was asking for advice on that. And he said, I have no idea who that is, and started laughing. And I thought he was just kind of joking. And as the conversation progressed along, he's like, no, seriously, I don't know who that is. I'm like, oh, I'll edit this out. But anyways, he was one of the people on BlueSky that reached out to interview you. So Seth, if you're watching, I got him first. Anyways, Origins sounds like this will be another fantastic addition to the books that you're writing. I am looking forward to hopping on in 11 days, 17 hours, 7 minutes, and 40 seconds. And also looking to the other volumes as they come out over the next few years. 2030 sounds like a long time away, but blink of an eye, it's here. You get through the next 3 years, we'll be okay. In closing though, just a question to you: is there, once this is done? I shouldn't say once this is done, something that you might decide to pick up. Is there another history that, of a particular, designer, publisher or whatnot, or legacy of the RPG industry and world that you would like to, tackle as another venture, such as, Origins or Free Trader Beowulf?
Yeah, I have my hands in a lot of pots right now.
Okay.
So when I did Origins, I think I mentioned that I was splitting my time. And the other thing I was doing was a series called Lost Histories. And the Lost Histories goes back to the company histories of the original designers and dragons and says, hey, what did I miss? You know, in the 70s, it's the companies that are small enough that they certainly didn't have the impact of it. So Balboa Game Company, that was the distribution arm of the Warhouse. That's one of the companies that's in the new one. Primarily so I could talk about Warlock. Errol Otis's original company that he ran out of Berkeley and did books like Booty and the Beasts. That's in there. So Lost Histories, it's 3 volumes. 2 of the volumes are 170s and 80s, 190s and odd odds. And the third volume is the much requested Tins book, which pretty much from the day we published the original one, people said, when's the Tins coming out? So I've got all of those. I've got a complete set of histories written for all of them. Before we sat down for this, I was editing Swab Entertainment, which is one of the articles for the Tins. I'm planning to hand that off to Evil Hat next year, probably early next year. And I think we're going to do a low-key release of it, which means we're going to say to current readers, hey, if you really enjoyed the original series and you want some matching books, here's these. We'll see how it happens. They're the marketing people. They will decide better than I the best way to put out it. But one of the reasons we don't want to be too high key is because the original Designers and Dragons books are out of print, at least for the offset copies. You can still get them PDF and POD at Drive-Thru-RPG, and they're out of date. And so we're going to do low-key these, and then I think the next thing I'm going to do, I think the next release is going to be a 3rd edition of Designers and Dragons, where we put all of the company histories together and, have a big encyclopedia that's all of the companies from these 7 books, plus the Platinum Appendix had a few that should go in there. So that's my most immediate projects. I've talked with people about maybe doing a Paranoia system history like Traveler. I've talked with people about maybe doing a Call of Cthulhu system history like Traveler. I have plotted out in my own mind, but not talked to anyone, about doing a basic role-playing history like Traveler. So I kind of see my books in four tiers at this point. I have at the bottom product histories, which, really dive in and do individual products. Above them, I have system histories, which look at a whole system, Traveler, Paranoia, Call of Cthulhu. Above them, I have company histories, though that can kind of be orthogonal because some systems go to many companies. And above that, I have universal histories, which I've never written one of, but I'd like to do just hey, here's a front-to-back history of the role-playing industry, all the big trends. So those are kind of all more future-looking things. I've also thought about doing more product histories like the ones I'm doing for D&D for Traveler, since hey, got a system history. I know a lot about the individual ones. Wouldn't we love to talk about just Mercenary, just the Aslan, other things like that? So those are all things I'm thinking of, but the Lost Histories and the 3rd edition, they're definitely happening.
Oh my God. The product history of Traveler, that's going to be what, 8 volumes, 10?
I was thinking about just doing 1 volume on Classic Traveler, but so that I don't go too far in. But I think that one would be a lot of fun. And I almost started it after we published This Is Free Trader Beowulf as kind of a thing to advertise it, but everything got away from me, and so I didn't at the time.
Well, you are a very busy man, and don't stop, because I get to reap the benefits. So again, Shannon, thank you so much. I definitely, head over to the Evil Hat's Backerkit site. I will put a link here in the description. Sign up for it. And obviously this is just for notification. In about 11 days, that's when you can hop on and grab it. I wish you, very much success with this, and I'm sure it will come regardless. And I look forward to it. And, hope, to see, the many things that to come. And, and if you ever, we'll talk about it offline, but if you ever want to send me a draft of something, you've got my email. But anywho, This has been yet another completely unprofessional interview. Thank you. And everyone watching, have a wonderful day. Take care.